Hi everyone, welcome to our first episode of All Things Endocannabinoid, where we discuss the many and varied ways we can support the endocannabinoid system in its vital role of keeping us and our patients in balance. Today, we'll focus on CBD in horses, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, a shining light in the equine veterinary world, all the way from Flint Hill, Virginia, Dr. Joyce Harman. Joyce, I'd like to give you a formal introduction as your extensive career is rich in many accomplishments. Dr. Joyce Harman graduated in 1980 from Virginia, Maryland Regional College of Veterinary Medicine and completed her membership into the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons in 1985. In 1990, she was certified in veterinary acupuncture and veterinary chiropractic in 1994. She has completed advanced training in homeopathy, herbal medicine, and Chinese medicine. Joyce has authored several books on saddle fit and homeopathy for horses and has published over 60 articles in professional journals, as well as many more for lay magazines. She has served on many boards, has been president for the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association and the Veterinary Botanical Medicine Association, and has been instrumental in creating guidelines for alternative medicine for the American Association of Equine Practitioners and the American Veterinary Medical Association. She is a current faculty member of CIVT. Joyce also owns Harmony Equine Clinic and Harmony Equine online store. And her goal is to help educate the equine industry about natural, holistic, and integrative medicine. Welcome, Joyce. I hope I got all that right. Thank you so much for making time to share your wealth of knowledge and experience with Australian vets today.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be able to share my lifetime of experience, and that's kind of where I'm at, I guess, in my life, is that it's really important, I think, to share and bring on new ideas and bring on some of the younger vets and get people excited about what is available alternatively.
Absolutely. So I'd first like to ask some general questions about CBD and then jump straight into specific applications for CBD in equine practice. I just first thought I would clarify what we're talking about in this interview and that we may interchangeably talk about CBD, cannabis, and hemp. But in this interview, it'll all essentially be referring to the same thing. So I think, Joyce, in Virginia, you're legally allowed to prescribe up to 0.3% weight per volume of THC and other cannabinoids, as well as cannabidiol. In Australia, we have a legal restriction on up to 0.2%, but I think essentially be a similar thing. Is that right, Joyce?
Yeah, that's correct. For hemp to be considered not marijuana being psychoactive, hemp being non-psychoactive, the legal limit across the country actually is 0.3% THC. 2% is going to be tough for you all just because the plant naturally produces some level of THC in these trace amounts. And there's certainly a bit of a push here to try and actually increase that amount, because if you're growing hemp and you are 0.35%, that harvest is considered not acceptable, which creates significant problems.
Yes, yeah. I think certainly it's such a highly regulated space, but I guess it's a lot smaller space here. Again, we don't have the situation where it's been really legalized in any way where it can be bought anywhere but other than through pharmacies. So compounding pharmacies basically have to have certificates of analysis that ensure that they fall within those guidelines. And the other interesting thing that they've done for Australian vets is made us unable to use Australian grown cannabis. So all the veterinary CBD essentially has to come from European or overseas sources. So ECS, for example, gets their CBD from Germany. So I guess it's an interesting space. We too here would love to have THC, the access to THC in higher quantities. And several years ago, Marta, again, my predecessor in this education role, did make a submission to the TGA, 56 pages, lots of information why we should be able to prescribe it and keep us in line with the Australian doctors. But unfortunately, it didn't make it through. The door's kind of open from the perspective that they've said if it, comes forward in the future, then that could change. So once again, it's a space that I'm also interested in, sort of in the background of maybe quietly getting vets together. And I think having a legal team like that's worked, I think, in California and whatnot is probably really important. So maybe getting some lawyers on board could be the way that we can do it. So really hopeful for the future that will happen.
Yeah,
So,
and I think having both your legal team and having your veterinarians and then diving in, and it looks like on your website you've been keeping up with some of the research that's happening, and there is research happening in the veterinary world around the world, and that's going to give you some of your data.
Absolutely.
Published research.
Yep. So I think I did do a BCS coffee chat about worldwide regulations. And after that, I did sort of reach out to Dr. Gary, and the name eludes me. He's the lawyer who's very much involved. So I think as time goes on, we'll sort of, quietly see if we can start putting together some kind of team, and hopefully it'll sort of grow organically and we can get there. Yes. So Joyce, before we go into the case studies, I just wanted to also ask you a little bit about your practice and when you started using CBD and how did that come about?
I had actually been interested in hemp because I knew, but even back in the 1990s, I knew value of hemp, and I knew that it had its medicinal qualities. And it also there's over 7,000 things you can do with hemp, from food to clothing to hempcrete to building material, you name it. And so, I just always kind of kept my ear to the grindstone, waiting to see what would happen with hemp. I sold hemp oil back in the 90s, even though people really didn't know what it was. I had to bring it in from either European or Canadian. And it didn't sell very well because people just didn't know what hemp oil was, even though just the hemp oil, which does not have the same types of medicinal properties, because you're really looking at that for your essential fatty acids.
Yeah.
But as the regulations were getting ready to change, with hemp actually becoming legal and CBD becoming legal, hemp becoming legal to grow in the United States, and then CBD becoming legal to sell, in the first year of hemp growing, I planted my legal 10 hemp plants. Hemp is a difficult plant, let me tell you. It's smelly, it's sticky, I didn't ever really successfully harvest my plants, but they were fun. They're beautiful plants. But, so I jumped on the bandwagon right away and found, because there were states, Colorado in particular, where hemp had become legal much earlier, there were sources to look at as soon as it became kind of federally legal to do this. And so I teamed up with a friend of mine, and we started looking at, he was right on it in the small animal world. And so we started looking at dosing for horses literally as soon as it really became legal. And in looking at the dosing, I was I picked some cases, clients of mine who had horses that I thought would A, be beneficial, and B, would be good clients that would give me feedback and stuff like that. And just about every single horse we gave it to had positive effects on their, whether it was a behavior or more of a medical kind of problem. We saw really good effects. Particularly in the early days, we were looking at some of the behavioral and the PTSD, post-traumatic stress type of syndrome horses who have had rough backgrounds. And then we found that it has digestive effects. And then research started to roll in a little bit in the small animal world, and we just expanded the use of it. And in the early days, and truthfully, even now, it's still kind of the Wild West as far as quality control, because there's no, even in the United States, there's no federal regulation or federal, I don't know that regulation is the best word, but it's part of it. But there's no federal oversight. So anybody can create a CBD company and they can put whatever garbage in it that they want, and there's nobody to oversee that. So I started manufacturing products for horses because I wanted my clients to have products that I knew the dosing was correct and I knew the quality was right. There's a big thing with hemp is that it's a bioaccumulator, which means that it's great at cleaning toxic soil, but you don't want to be eating that stuff. You can be wearing it, you can be making buildings out of it, you can, do other things, but because it will absorb toxic substances in the soil, you want to have quality, organically grown or cleanly grown product. And so that was what kind of got me started in the whole hemp industry and creating, a product that I knew would work. And since then, there are a lot more companies out there doing a really good job, making good products. And we have huge marketing issues here. Lots of people are using it. Veterinarians are kind of getting on board, or at least not persecuting their clients if their clients say, yes, I am using it. A lot of vets are not yet comfortable because of the federal regulations that go against it. They're not yet comfortable talking a lot about it, or they don't know a lot about it, and they don't know about quality. So I just have been incorporating it in my practice for a few years now.
Yeah. And I guess you've touched on attitude of clients and veterinarians, which is a similar space to here. I think there's a lot more push from clients towards their veterinarians, and there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. I'm really interested in how does that education work in the States? Are vets, how do they access education on the endocannabinoid system and cannabis medicine? Are any universities starting to introduce this at all?
What's really interesting, I don't know about some of the classes at the universities. I know that Dr. Rob Silver is actually on the staff at one of the newer universities down in the South as a hemp endocannabinoid researcher and lecturer. But there actually are quite a number of the vet schools that have a research program going, very often funded by a company. Many of them are very simple studies, looking at absorption, looking at blood levels, but they are doing them. I mean, I've run across some what I thought very conservative universities that actually have a study or two going on.
Yeah, great. That's a really interesting thing, and certainly that's on my list of things to do, is to really sort of start opening dialogue with universities. I met a lady through VCS who's over in New Zealand, and she may well be, her company may well be responsible for the first registered product in veterinary medicine, and she was going to reach out to the New Zealand universities. So as you say, I guess it's the money that gets these things rolling, and companies can get behind the universities. Then I'm sure that there's always students or members of the staff who are needing to find good topics to research, and certainly CBD is one of them. So as we get into applications for CBD medicine, I just wanted to ask I know you use full spectrum CBD, which is what we've been talking about. Why is that? And do you ever use isolate?
So I come to CBD from more of being an herbalist. And so I like to work with the whole plant. And as we know from herbal medicine, we can take an isolated ingredient, the classic being aspirin coming from white willow bark, and take the salicylic acid component out and create, we have side effects, which I don't think we have with the CBD isolates, but we we have the word bantered around in the hemp world is the entourage effect. In the herbal world, it's just the herbal effect. It's the effect of the whole plant versus, say, Silymarin extract from. So if I look at it from wanting to bring as much of the plant as possible to the picture. Having said that, people do see results with isolates. And sometimes from a university perspective, it's a little easier to study an isolate because they're looking at one ingredient. So it makes them a little happier in their analysis than to say, well, could it have been the terpenes? Could it have been some trace THC? We've actually been able to join up with a company that has come up with their own kind of extraction process that's preserving a tremendous amount of the terpenes naturally. And to me, that's more exciting than looking at taking the isolates and working with them. But if we want to look at, say, what is the effect of, we have our cannabinoids, our CBD that we know about, but there's so many, maybe as many as 100 or more cannabinoids that are what we call minor cannabinoids. How are we going to understand how they work? And that's where some research using isolates can be very beneficial. What is CBN? What is CBG? And what is that effect of that? And then you can go back and use that herbally in a broader spectrum or full spectrum or whatever you want to call it, but you can use it in that entourage effect if you actually know what's different about CBN versus CBG.
Yep. And regarding safety, what side effects have you seen and what precautions do you take when prescribing CBD for your patients?
So, truthfully, I have seen very few side effects. I would say there's been one or two horses that people have reported hives that they thought were related to feeding of CBD. Maybe one horse that had some loose manure they thought might be related to it. I have had some horses refuse to eat it on rare occasions. And is that because it's not comfortable for them to ingest it, or is it because they're just persnickety and they don't like you putting things in their food? But it is one of the safer things out there, I find. And they have you'll see various different dosing regimes based on different companies' products. Some of the really high dosing regimes that I have seen listed, I'm suspicious that the product is not really very strong one way or another, or not very good quality, because if I took some of the CBD product that I'm working with and feed 150 milligrams, the horses are probably going to lay down and go to sleep because it's just way too much. But there are some people that I have talked to who have used it sort of in clinic and have gone to some very high doses in some severe cases and not having any side effects from it. So the horse world seems to be a very, very safe product.
Yeah. That's so good to know. Very reassuring for us to hear. Are there any drug or herb interactions to be mindful of when considering CBD?
So that's a really important question. And most of the drugs that we're using in the horse world, there is probably even little technical interaction with. It does upregulate the cytochrome 450, if I've said that right, enzymes. And so technically, there are drugs that it can have an effect on, and that probably becomes more important in small animal medicine with some of the drugs that act differently than what we commonly use for horses, because most of what we use in the horse world are some anti-inflammatories and antibiotics and some steroids, but not some of the detailed cardiac drugs and things like that, where the dosage can become very, very critical. The other thing is that we're actually using a very low dose of cannabinoids. And clinically, I have not seen any issues. It doesn't mean that, and this is why the veterinarians really should be involved, is to understand if they're going to prescribe a drug where there potentially could be an interaction, the veterinarian needs to know or should know that the client is using it. And that's where the veterinarians, even if they don't know a lot about it, really should try to educate themselves, because the clients are out there using it.
Yeah.
At least in the States. I mean, because of your restrictions, you're going to have a bit less of that than we do. But
well,
I mean, here's everybody using it under the table.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem, that certainly CBD is acceptable in small animal world now. And I think, 4 years have sort of gone under the bridge, and people have been using it, and they've been seeing effects. Horse world is still in this position where, even though we can't legally use it, obviously cannabis grows like weeds, so there's certain pockets of places in Australia where clients are able to very easily get hold of CBD, and it's it's one of my goals that, exactly like you said, cannabis medicine needs to be put back firmly into the hands of equine veterinarians. So that I think is really important for all those reasons that you mentioned before, on quality, on levels of cannabinoids in these products, and so on and so forth. So look, now for the part that I think everyone's waiting for. Can you tell that where we get you to tell us about how to use CBD in practice? I'd like to start with a condition that you briefly mentioned earlier that's of particular interest to myself, as I think it's affected many horses that I've known in some way, and that's PTSD. And to give you a little context, here in Australia, we have a huge racing industry, and that results in a large amount of wastage of these magnificent creatures. A few years ago, an expose aired on the grizzly, and that many of these ex-race horses came to in abattoirs. And since then, the industry has been pouring huge amounts of money into repurposing these horses for second lives in equestrian competition and recreation homes. This is rarely a straightforward process, as I believe many of these horses suffer from PTSD, along with physical injuries picked up in their racing careers, both minor and major. I believe CBD could really help these horses recover and transition more smoothly into their new lives. You first caught my attention, as I mentioned earlier, when you talked about PTSD and rescue horses in the VCS Equine Coffee Chat. So I'd really like to invite you now to tell us a bit more about PTSD in horses and your experience with CBD as a therapy.
It's probably one of the places I think CBD shines perhaps the most. It's also a wonderful old horse tonic because it works on pain, it works on inflammation, it works on their lifetime of mental and physical stress. And when you look at the research that's being done, though, and on the PTSD side with the humans who have been through whatever their PTSD sources are, whether it's war or family or whatever, the research is solid that there are brain changes that occur with the use of the endocannabinoid system, and CBD affects that directly. I won't say that every single horse is going to go, oh, life's cool, I'm perfect, just because you have CBD. Yeah, we all want that silver bullet, but CBD is close. It's not quite, nothing's perfect. But a brain is a brain. And whether it's in a horse or a dog or a human, there are many similarities in how the brain reacts to trauma. And we know, your race horses are the classic horses that have been traumatized, used too young. Take a 2-year-old and confine it the way we do in America. They're in their stall 23 and a half hours a day, and they get, 20 minutes of exercise if they're lucky. And looks like I froze up there for a little bit.
It's all right. I can see you're almost coming back, but you're back now, so that's the main thing.
I'm back. Okay. Great. So with horses who have been mentally and physically traumatized, CBD is really sort of that perfect one-stop shop. We're going to make some actual changes in their brain chemistry that allow them to recover from those abusive stresses, and we're going to make a change in their body pain level. And almost any horse that's been through PTSD type of approaches or a type of lives, whether it's coming from racing, whether it's coming from a backyard, very abusive situation, or quite honestly, coming from some of these horse show barns that are, as we have all the stuff that's happening with the Olympics and the discussion around horse abuse, I would say there's a tremendous amount of physical and mental abuse at are very high levels of competition. And so we can take these horses and help them de-stress much faster and allow them that ability to focus on us helping them. And at the same time, part of that de-stress is to take away some pain. So CBD is well known and well researched for its pain relief, whether it's arthritis, whether it's tendon and ligament pain. It really doesn't matter where that source of physical pain, saddle fitting, the whole 9 yards. So you can help transition these horses a lot faster.
Yeah. I've had a good experience with my own off-track thoroughbreds. So hopefully that information, thank you so much, will help other vets be able to help these horses. May I ask what dose you commonly use and how long you would expect to treat these horses, or even sort of horses in the the maybe pain situation?
Generally, I start at around a 25 milligram dose twice a day for your average size horse. In many cases, that is all you need, and you don't necessarily, for the PTSD horses, need higher and higher doses. You can, though. It's ideal to wait 2 weeks. Most people can't wait that long, so at least wait a week before changing the dose to a little bit higher level, and you can increase that dose. You can double it, you can triple it if you're not seeing an effect. Usually, I'm going to see an effect. Most of the PTSD type of horses do have an effect at the lower doses. And I think that's the dose selected is going to be a little bit based on the research by the company who is putting together, their normals basically for that particular product. But I would always start at the lower end. I have seen many horses after 2 or 3 months, they end up feeding it once a day. So they're essentially having the dose, and these horses will continue to do really well on a fairly low and very affordable dose. Other horses you find will need it for a much longer period of time, and there are some horses that you will increase that dose 2 or 3 times that kind of as a baseline. And where I've probably had some of the most variable successes have been in things like laminitis, and I think the potential there is that I'm not going to a high enough dose, that some of these horses that seem to not really respond might need 3 or 4 or 5 times that dose, where we actually have to go to a much higher level. And that becomes oftentimes a cost issue for the clients as well when you get into extremely high doses. So it's something that, sometimes clinicians or manufacturers can do more easily than the average client. But there are people who can and will spend it. There comes a point, though, if you're not getting a response, stop. It's not working. Or you stop and you find out that, oh yes, I was having maybe a 25% effect. I wasn't having 100% effect, but I was having a 25% effect, and you take that away and you go, oh, okay, I'm going to put that back in because I was having an effect and it was positive. It just wasn't what I hoped for.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. I've definitely seen that in the small animal space. So you've mentioned what a wonderful medication it can be for geriatrics, which I find in small animal practice. Are there other typical conditions where you would choose CBD as a treatment? And is that treatment essentially sort of I think you've probably elaborated on what your treatment strategy looks like. So can you give us some other typical conditions that respond well to CBD?
One to particularly look at, there's several actually, but is horses with ulcers. And even though CBD itself is not a direct effect on the ulcer, though there is a couple of research studies showing there's endocannabinoid receptors in the gut, and B, that there is a positive effect in the gut. I won't say that I am curing ulcers with CBD, but the anti-stress aspect of CBD and the positive effect on the digestive tract makes it certainly an excellent adjunct to horses with ulcers and GI disturbance. Yeah. And in some cases, it may relieve a lot of it. And I think that some of the cases we see of horses that are cribbers who stop cribbing, and there was one study, actual published case study, I don't know if you've run across that one, on a cribbing horse, I think it was Italy or something, but I have seen a number of other horses stop cribbing, and I think what it's done is it's taken away their stress, their PTSD, or their reason for cribbing, and it has relieved some of the inflammation and the discomfort in their gut, and so they don't have that need anymore. So it's well worth exploring in these guys. CBD is not legal in the international competition world, and it is not legal in the U.S. competition world in the level of sport where drug testing is done. Yeah. There's plenty of people using it in the backyard horse shows and things like that where nobody's drug testing. But that is something in the equine world that you need to be very clear with people who are in competition and go to the extent of, and this is particularly in using something for ulcers or behavioral issues, but if there are horses that are going to be competing internationally and you're going to do a withdrawal, let's say 5 to 7 days, 7 days absolutely safe, 5 days very safe, but you have to make sure that the person feeding the horse doesn't accidentally give them the CBD as they're coming up towards competition. Mm-hmm. So I will have people actually lock it away in the trunk or lock it away in a cupboard to make sure that Joe Blow coming in to feed doesn't mess up, because they are looking for it competition-wise. The other thing, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's a really useful point, I'm sure, for our vets to know that, I guess, because there's no published data that I'm aware of on withholds, I guess, in your experience, to know that CBD shouldn't be precluded from use in these high-end competition horses. Just make sure that everyone is mindful and very, very careful with utilizing, at least a 5 to 7 day withhold. So thank you for that, Joyce.
Yeah. The other thing that where CBD seems to be quite effective, and we really don't have a lot of other treatments for, is in the head shakers. And I don't know if you have those in Australia.
I'm not sure, again, because I'm not an equine vet, but I'll be really interested to see if that is something, talking with the equine vets that I do. So look, carry on, Joyce.
So I was listening to an herbalist lecturing about the trigeminal neuralgia in humans, which is incredibly painful and is often actually kind of called a suicide disease because the amount of pain is absolutely intense. And the horses with head shaking, there seem to be a variety of causes for these head shaker horses. They can be very difficult to ride. These horses are definitely, many of them, in intense pain. And some of them are very sensitive to light, and it's considered a photic head shaking. Some of them seem to be more sensitive to pollen being breathed in through their nose or dust. Sometimes you can put a mask over them and they can function. Many horses are basically unrideable during the season, if they have a season in which they're doing this head shaking. And it most closely resembles a trigeminal neuralgia type of sensation. And there's a few drugs that have been used with very varying degrees of success. But interestingly enough, CBD actually has an effect on the trigeminal nerve and on the nervous system that this human herbalist detailed in quite well for me, and I went home and started trying it on head shakers, and it has been, I think, quite successful in most of them, and successful enough that, and I'm probably not the first, I may not be the first one to have used it, but the scuttlebutt, if people research head shaking now on the internet, they will often come up with somebody who has had some success with using CBD. So it's kind of spreading out there in the horse world that it's useful. And clinically, I have seen some excellent results with it. You often have to repeat it every year during the cycle because many of these horses are cyclic. And during the hot months of the year, the buggy months or the dusty months, a few of them, though, are year round.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. And I know you sort of touched on it maybe a little bit with the high pain. I was interested in conditions where CBD doesn't seem to be so helpful. Obviously, with the laminitis, you've suggested that maybe higher doses could be helpful, and I think that was reflected in possibly some other comments on the VCS equine chat. But are there other conditions that you see where you haven't found CBD to be so helpful?
I wouldn't say I have a ton of great results with skin conditions. I have, though, had horses who have maintained very healthy skin when they have not in the past. Horses that were prone to getting crud after rain, horses that tended to get a lot of hives. I have definitely seen some of those improve, but I can't say that if I have a horse with itchy skin or that's rubbing themselves raw, I can't say that CBD is my first line of defense at all. Maybe for a little bit of the stress that they're under, but not for a lot of treatment. And that could be a dose thing. It could be because we have endocannabinoid receptors in the skin, but I'm not sure that that's a big use for it. Some of the pain conditions, I mean, there is a limit as to what it can override. And you get some of these extremely degenerate joints and, you probably need some drugs because there's just so much pathology there. You may still help the horse at least a little bit and help them deal with the stress of being in pain. But in general, many of the common issues that we're going to run into with horses, it is certainly worth a try. And we're usually looking, I won't say I've seen a ton of results respiratory wise, but I won't say I've used it in a lot of those cases.
Yeah. And just one other question, which I think Veronica may have forwarded you a client letter that a vet received the other day after utilizing a CBDA fortified full spectrum product on a horse that's responded really nicely to CBD for inflammatory bowel disease. Have you used it in that type of condition?
I have a few horses that I've used it in. I think one of my trial horses was probably, if we worked him up at that point in time, sort of an inflammatory bowel. I do think that, again, it's one of those things that is well worth trying. And I have not used a lot of the CBDA, and I think CBDA is, again, one of those things that we need to look at further. And the nice thing about the CBDA is the less processing that's involved and consequently more accessible financially. And I think a little bit more herbal, more natural, if you will, because you haven't processed it as much. So anything where you're dealing with that gut endocannabinoid system, I would absolutely give it a try.
Yeah. And Joyce, have you had any or much experience with using topicals? Once again, we've got a CBDA fortified product that we're trialing, I guess, at the moment.
I haven't used as much topicals. I would have to say with the hair of the horse, we need to come up with topicals that are absorbed through that hair. And you have to think about the hair in the winter as well as the hair in the summer, though it may be more useful in the shed out summer coat. But I can't say that I have a ton of experience because I just don't have access to product that seems to be economical enough. If you're going to cover a hock with it, it's a fair bit of a base. And it's so easy to feed it internally.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Joyce. Well, there's so much we could talk about, but I think that might be sort of getting close to time. So is there anything else that you'd particularly like to add to Australian vets out there?
Give this stuff a try, because it really is a plant that has such diverse uses and horses are herbalists. They are natural. They eat plants. That's what they do. And this is a plant that has so many uses and has such a high safety margin that you really don't have to worry about experimenting. If you're not sure, it's okay, because you're not going to get into trouble.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joyce, for giving your time up today to help educate vets here in Australia on how and when to use CBD in their horse practice. I'd also like to direct our audience to other educational material Joyce has produced. There's another great YouTube video on demystifying hemp, and Joyce's books, as well as her horse nutrition course, are available through Harmony Equine online shop. Joyce has also produced 4 webinars on CIVT, equine gut health, the equine microbiome, an integrative approach to musculoskeletal conditions of the horse, and Lyme disease, which fortunately we don't have to contend with here in Australia. So once again, a massive... Oh, do we? Oh boy. Okay, my bad.
Yeah, you have Lyme disease floating around. Maybe not at the level we do, but it does exist there.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. Yeah. These things, they manage to get their way all around the world. So yeah, thank you for putting that educational material out there. So I'd really encourage everybody to go and check all of that out. Once again, a massive thank you, Joyce. And good luck with your ongoing goal in education, helping horses through educating their people. So thank you, Joyce.
Thanks for having me.